Greetings and welcome to room 303. We are in your hymnals in Senior English A on page 301. And we now turn back to our study of the 1611 King James Version of the Bible. Put a note to yourself at level 1 that the first two of our readings, Psalm 23 and Psalm 137, come from what is known in the 1611 King James Version of the Bible as the Old Testament. The reading now that we turn to and the one to follow come from what we call, for your notes at level 1, the New Testament. That is to say, the work of the Christian New Testament, and more particularly, a text that was originally written in Greek. Before, we were translating out of the Hebrew. Now we are translating out of the Greek and some Aramaic. We are going to turn first on page 301 to what is called a passage from the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount. And you'll want to write down at level 1, we are reading from Matthew 6, verses 24 through 30. Matthew 6, verses 24 through 30. Now, let's make a couple of observations that are set up in nature here. First of all, what is up with this Matthew? Like, what is that about? In the New Testament, you have different kinds of books that are named usually, often, either after the person who wrote the book or purported to write the book or to whom the book was written for, okay? Matthew is the first of what we will call the 4 Gospels. That is to say, the stories about Jesus Christ. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then finally John. Those are the 4 Gospels. Matthew is the first one, okay? Each of these books of the Gospels are then divided up into chapters and verses, just like in the Old Testament. What's up with this Sermon on the Mount? Let's write that one down really quickly. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. 3 chapters collectively are called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, what is that about? 2 things. 1, Jesus Christ is purported to have spoken these words, and they are often perceived as a sermon because nobody else talks during it. So in other words, you don't have any kind of a give and take. Well, what do you think? And then somebody else will come back as an interlocutor, and then Jesus will come back and talk. None of that. In other words, it's just straight Jesus talking all the way through. If any of you ever saw a translation of the King James Version of the Bible that was called the Red Letter Edition, and you opened up to the book of Matthew and you saw some of the letters were red and some of the letters were black, anything in red are the words spoken by Jesus Christ. You will see that Matthew 5, 6, and 7 all red. In other words, there's no black lettering because all these words are spoken specifically by Christ. What's up with the Mount? That's just short for mountain. And we're told at the very beginning, when Jesus walks up on the mountain, he sits down and he begins to speak these words. Finally, let's jot this down. This series of chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, has often been thought of as the heart of Christian code of ethics, the way you are supposed to act, okay? We will be looking just at a few of the verses from the Sermon on the Mount. We want to point out the ways in which, for example, at level 2b, the language of Matthew's Gospel chapter 6, verses 24 through 30, is a little bit different kind of language in some regards from the Psalms that we were looking at before. Now let's point out a couple of quick observations about this person, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a Jew. He was Hebrew. He was Jewish. And so his whole young life, he was raised learning to read what we would later call in the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, the Old Testament. In other words, when Jesus Christ is speaking these words right here, he probably has, just as most young Jewish boys would, memorized by heart Psalm 23 and Psalm 137, the 2 Psalms that we took a look at. And even more of those Psalms, of course, the famous Psalm 22, that Jesus is purported to have recited on the very cross while he was dying. My God, why have you forsaken me?" is the opening lines of Psalm 22. So in other words, there's a background here where Jesus kind of knows some of these word pictures, and now he's going to play the game in his own sermon. Let's go ahead now and turn to it. We'll be reading verses 24 through 30. The opening lines of Matthew 6 is the famous Beatitudes, as they're sometimes referred to as. We'll take a look at them now here. No man can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, or what you shall drink, nor yet for your body, what you shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body more than raiment? Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are you not much better than they? Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? And why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Now let's turn to an annotation at level 1 of these verses. And let's see if we can, first of all, understand exactly what he's saying. He's going to work again, let's say it at 2b. He's going to work with some very powerful word pictures here. Ones that will have tremendous influence at level 3a. Ones that will have tremendous influence in many texts to follow. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. Notice he begins by saying, no man can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now the word mammon here simply means money or stuff. So write that down. In other words, what actually is Jesus saying in verse 24 of Matthew 6? He is saying you have to make a choice in your life between, on the one hand, serving good things, God would be here referenced as that, or money. Now, sometimes this distinction is understood as the difference between which is more important, money or love. This distinction comes actually right here from this verse and verses like it, and other ideas as well expressed in other works of literature. That is to say, which is in your life, 3B question, which is in your life more important to you? Money and having lots of money and working really hard to get lots of money and power, or to have good things in life like love, friendship? Let's look at verse 25. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, or what you shall drink, nor yet for your body, what you shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body more than raiment? Now let's point out something here, and we'll enjoy making an observation at 3a, about the Socratic inquiry. That is to say, asking questions. Let's put it in our notes. One of the ways that Christ likes to teach in the Gospels is through asking questions. Look at the question that he just asked. What is your life? What really is your life? In other words, this is going to be Thoreau's question. Remember, in Walden, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately and to front only the essential facts of life. Remember this whole notion? In other words, Thoreau says, I went to the woods because I wanted to find out what life was all about. What is the essential stuff of life? Let's write it in our notes this way. The question at level 1 is, what matters the most in a life well lived? Is it things like what you eat? Is it things like what you wear? In other words, does clothing really matter that much? And why do we spend so much time worrying about it? Look at the next one. Verse 26 is an interesting word picture, and it is, of course, for those of us that love nature, this is going to be a very famous word picture. He says, look at the birds, the fowls of the air. They sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are you not much more than they? Now, this is a very interesting word picture. It asks a very interesting question. What about birds? They don't seem to all the time be planting seeds and growing things and worrying about what they're going to wear. And yet somehow birds seem to be taken care of. By the way, we should point out, birds spend a lot of time doing what? Building a nest, right? In other words, it's not to say that birds don't work, but they don't seem to have so many cares. Let's write that down. That's the point right now of this observation. Worry. Often seniors will say this. When I was a freshman, I never worried the way I seem to worry now. One of the ways I know this is my sleep patterns. When I was younger, I could sleep and no worries. But as I got older, I started to sleep less and less well. And now as a senior, I cannot sleep. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and start thinking about the future. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I can't go back to sleep. Here, notice the question is, what are you so worried about? Really? Life cannot be about just what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. Notice verse 27 is a funny question. Can we even say it ironic? It's an ironic question. Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? In other words, you cannot try to make yourself grow taller. Many, especially young boys, when they're very young, they desperately want to get taller, right? My own son was like this. He always wanted to try to get taller, make himself get tall. He would measure, right? And then he would try and see if he had grown. He would say, I'm going to go to sleep, and then I'm going to make myself grow at night so that when I wake up, I am taller. Of course, the irony here, we laugh about something like that, but the observation here is you cannot think yourself to more height. But what is the implication of this observation? Whoa, this is a very subversive idea. Lots of students have liked this idea. The question seems to be, what's the point of going to school? I mean, really? So you sit in rooms, you take all these notes, you sit in math class, you do all these stupid problems, you sit in science classes, you do all this silly stuff. What's the question you asked when you were young? When will I ever use any of this? There seems to be a question here that says, why do we spend all our lives thinking and worrying? What do we seem to gain by it? And the answer of the rhetorical question seems to be, the only thing we gain is more worry, more concern. Look at the next one. And why take you thought for raiment? Why are you so worried about the things you wear, your clothing? Consider the lilies of the field. Of course, a very famous line, right? The lilies of flowers of the field. How they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. Now, this is a very interesting question. The flowers, who taught the flowers how to grow so beautiful? Did they go to school? Did they have to do annotations? Do the roses in your mom's garden, did they have to take notes to learn how to grow up? The obvious answer is no. They just grow up. Well, then what's up with us? Why can't we just grow the way natural plants do? Why do we always have to have all of this stuff we got to worry about all the time? Again, guys, let's point this out. This is kind of subversive. It begs the question, what really is the point of all this schooling anyway? I mean, are we better off because we have to go to 12 stinking years of school? Really? 12 years? How is it possible? And of course, for those of us who are going on to university, by the time we're finished, we will have done 20, maybe years of school. Dude, are you kidding me? Why? Notice there seems to be a kind of live and let live, naturalistic, let's put it in our notes that way, naturalistic suggestion. Life would be a whole lot easier if we could just be more natural. Remember what Whitman says in Leaves of Grass? I think I could turn and live with the animals, he says. I don't want to live with humans anymore. Why? They worry about everything, right? They're always worrying all the time. They got to get a job, they got to make money, they got to worry about people getting along with them or not. He says, I just want to be like my dog. I just want to live like a cat. I just want to have a free life. I want to be free of worry. Look at the next one. He says about the grass in the fields, about flowers, I say to you, even Solomon, one of the great kings of Israelite history, in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye, of little faith? Now let's point out this little faith idea at level 1. What he means here is, when you're worrying all the time, you're not enjoying your life. You're not enjoying your life. If you want to enjoy your life, you have to live without worrying about stuff all the time. All right, let's jump to 2A really quickly, messages and themes. What is for you the major message or theme of this? Is it almost like you're being somehow challenged to answer the question, what is the most important stuff in your life? A very interesting 3B question, right? What is it that really matters? We'll get to that question here in a moment. Notice the idea about worry. Stress is not positive. It seems to be more negative than positive, right? Don't stress out. What is it they say? Don't sweat the little things, and it's all little things, right? In other words, don't worry, be happy. Lots and lots of different implications. At 2B, let's talk literary analysis, rhetoric for just a moment. What is for you your favorite word picture here? Is it that one of trying to make yourself grow taller, right? Is it that one about the flowers? The beautiful flowers. They didn't have to take notes. A flower never had to learn to do homework all the time. Well, my cat at home doesn't have to do homework. My cat seems to be very, very happy. Give him a little bit to eat, give him a place to sleep. He seems to be very fine. Dude, why do I got to spend so much of my life worry all the time? Of course, this question of freedom is a big one. So let's jump back up to 2A really quickly. Freedom. What makes you free? Answer. Not having to worry about lots of silly things. Question. How do I get there? Now that is an interesting question. Notice that the last word of this passage is the word faith, a word that we saw in an earlier reading as well. That is to say, the capacity to believe in something, right? Let's jump to 3A really quickly and messages, texts that are going to relate to this one. What is for you your favorite movie that basically teaches the idea stress is a bad idea, it's not good for you? What is your favorite song that basically says, what really one song actually said, don't worry, be happy? What is for you your favorite chill song? When you start to feel really stressed out and you start to get really worried about stuff, it's your one go-to song that just tells you, dude, just chill, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to work out in the end. Of course, 3B leads us obviously to the question about yourself as worrier. Are you a worrier? The great psychologist Sigmund Freud said, we're always full of anxiety, which is why right now some of you have your fingers in your mouth or the tips of your pen in your mouth. This thing of biting, worrying. Freud called it anxiety, right? Anxious. Being anxious all the time, worrying. Where do you live on that spectrum of 0, no worries, 10, worrying all the time? Where do you put yourself? Try and answer that question real quickly. Do you put yourself at a 5? Some of you will say, you know what, this is a historically interesting question. When I was a freshman in high school, no worries. Now that I'm a senior, my worry spectrum is way down there at 8, 9, 10. The next question. What is the greatest source of your worries? What is the greatest source of your concern, your worries? Now let's jump back to 3A for just a moment and let's jot down Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor, that inventor in many ways of classical Stoicism. And he said in his meditations the following. There are 2 things that happen in your life. Pay attention to them. 2 things that happen in your life. 1, things you can control. That is to say, you actually bring them on yourself. All right? Maybe, for example, the way you act towards somebody creates the problem or whatever. The second are the things you cannot control. That is to say, the stuff beyond your control. For some of you that say, whoa, I've heard this a lot of times before. A very ancient idea, and yet a very important one. Aurelius simply says the following. If you are worrying about things you cannot control, that is called dumb, real dumb. Why? Because there's nothing you can do to alter or change it. If there's nothing you can do to alter or change it, then why worry about it so much? Sounds very similar to this idea as well. Finally, to what degree do you think you can handle stress? How good are you at handling stress? What is the best way for you to handle stress? Some students will say it's to go and have a long walk, or to go to a workout or something like that. Some students will say it's good for me to talk with somebody. So that's why I have pals. When I start getting kind of freaked out or stressed, I kind of find somebody to talk to. Some students will report, I got to be honest. I don't talk to as many adults now as I once did. But when I start getting freaked out about the future, that's when I go find a counselor. I go sit down with a teacher or with an adult or my parent or somebody that I trust, and I start talking about it. Because talking about it seems to kind of help me to be able to somehow work through my concerns. Some students will say, I don't talk about it, I write it. I sit down and I start writing about it. I try and figure out what is the problem and how am I going to address the problem. The last question, the last word of this passage is the word faith. That is to say, believe. Do you think it's true that if you can believe in something, really believe in it, that you will have less worry, less stress, that you can be more relaxed, more chill? Do you think that there will be more stress coming in your life in the future or less stress coming in your life in the future? And seniors often will report, "No, I've asked this question to the adults in my life, and they keep telling me no matter how busy I think I am, it's only going to get worse, not better." Do you think we can still live a simple life? Basically, in this passage, the admonition is, dude, don't worry about everything. Just chill out. Don't worry. It's all going to work out. It's all going to fix itself. Do you think there's any truth to that idea? Or are you more inclined to say, yeah, I don't know. That's a pretty simple way to look at the world. I don't see the world that way anymore. Well, there you go. The Sermon on the Mount. Thank you.